Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good day, good day. Welcome, everyone, to today's session at the BA seminar. I'll sit down, actually. So before we begin, I'd like to welcome you all here in First Nations, they'll say Yarumbai. And I'll also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we are meeting today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay respect to the people, the culture, and the elders past and present. So thank you once again, everyone, for making time today. I know everyone's really busy, especially this month. We have the PNG independence, and three of us are Papua New Guineans, and we're quite busy with the program planning. And we have a seminar, a symposium on Thursday. Those online, it's it's on the 11th of September from the morning, so 9 till 5 p.m. And it's here at the Crawford School building, the Western Theatre. Thank you. I think many here have registered, so really looking forward to that. So that's a celebration of Papua New Guinea's 50 years anniversary, but also looking forward at the next 50. What would that look like for us? You guys can hear me, yeah? Okay, so today, the title of our DPA seminar is on gendered experiences and challenges in political participation and labor mobility. We know that in Papua New Guinea, we do face complex development as well as gender issues, and it affects both men and women in various sectors, but also in labor mobility and in political leadership. And today I am joined by two amazing women scholars who have spent time researching, thinking through the different experiences in these two areas, in labor mobility, political participation. We have Natasha Turia and GJ Mili, both PhD candidates here at the Department of Pacific Affairs. For those who don't, I know most of you know them, but just as an introduction for those who don't know them, those online. GJ's research focuses on women's political representation and participation in Bougainville, specifically looking at constitution making process. And she can talk a little bit more about that later through the question and answers that we will be conducting today. Natasha's research examines the extent of PNG's decentralized recruitment practices in unlocking labor mobility aspirations through participation in Pacific labor mobility, seasonal employer scheme, and also the Pacific engagement visa. And I am Mercy Master, and I'm a research fellow with the Department of Pacific Affairs. In terms of our session today, we'll have 40 minutes sort of Talanoa talk story Q&A, and then 20 minutes for anyone who has questions or would like to reflect. All right. Thank you, ladies. I will begin with you, Natasha, if that's okay, on labor mobility. So in your research, have you observed, I guess, differences in the experiences of men and women who in Papua New Guinea in terms of applying for the labor mobility to the Pacific labor engagement or mobility or other seasonal employers program? Like, what has been the kind of difference that men and women experience in terms of applying, being recruited, and the processes?
Thank you. It's my first DPA actually since I arrived, but I'm very happy to be here today with this team, and particularly leading to independence very soon. I think labor mobility for PNG as well as for the Pacific, I'm calling them now the most prominent politically charged migration pathways to Australia. The Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme, the PAM scheme, is Australia's temporary migration visa to Australia, specifically designed to fill labour market shortages in key sectors in Australia. So where those sectors are has also a big influence on women's participation in schemes. And for PNG, and this is not unique to PNG, you want me to speak louder? It's predominantly male driven because it's heavy lifting, more laborious work. But the PALM scheme has evolved since 2019. So you actually have two streams now, scheme. And so this has also seen an increase in women's participation, particularly in the long-term stream, which is 1 to 4 years, because you've got aged care now, you have early childhood education care as well. So for Papua New Guinea, I think the reason why you want to participate will determine whether you pick the temporary labor mobility scheme, which you aren't allowed to bring family with you. And then there's specific engagement visa, which is permanent migration, where you can bring family with you. So whilst there's been a steady increase, but very slow increase in women's participation in the PALM scheme, and this is really because we've got aged care now, and more women are joining the scheme for picking, packing, and I guess more administrative support roles within these agriculture and horticulture sectors. It's really the Pacific Engagement Visa Scheme that I see more women's participation. And I'll give you an example. For Papua New Guinea, we're supposed to reach 8,000 by 2025. We have not reached 8,000 yet, we're only around 6,000. We had over 8,000 registrations for the Pacific Engagement Visa for only 1,350 slots. I did a survey of Papua New Guineans between December of 24 to January of 2025. 65% of that cohort are women. So accessing the visa is really determined by how they can get onto the scheme. So labor mobility, it's very manual, hard labor, and employers are actually looking for more men anyway. So that's going to influence women's participation in the PALM scheme. Whereas for the PEV, it is not employer driven. And so there's more opportunity for them to access the scheme. And so that's why we see more than 65% of women registering for the PEV, and they are married, they have dependents. Some are even single mothers with children. So I think the most striking difference of women's participation in labor mobility is not just whether you can get an income, but if you can take your families with you. So, I mean, I think these are big reasons or things that we consider when we are thinking about migrating, whether it's temporarily, and if it's only for 9 months, okay, maybe I can leave the family behind. But then that's also, who's going to take care of the kids while you're, can you trust your husband? Yeah. And do you need to call in, extra support, mother-in-law, auntie, sisters, there's just this whole logistics behind taking care of your family if you participate in the PALM scheme versus getting on the Pacific Engagement Visa and yet I'll just take my family with me.
What about like some of the men who apply for either? Do they also think about like family dynamics? Is that something like from your conversations, interviews with them? Was that something that they immediately think about, or you have to prompt them in your research to think about?
If they're married, the experiences of family separation are the same because you're leaving children behind, particularly for PALM scheme. So there's no difference. I think it just depends on the prior relationship and understanding between the couples before the other person leaves. So if there is understanding already about what, how the family is going to operate with one parent being abroad, they should, and it's not perfect, there's lots of issues, negative issues that have come about from the PALM scheme, but like I always say, the PALM scheme will only be as good as the partnership. So if there's no partnership in the beginning between partnership and understanding, then the experience of men and women will be the same. I think for women, particularly if they've left, even if they remain and the husband goes, there's still some form of, I wouldn't say, no, the word for it. I mean, I haven't encountered any kind of physical violence against women who were abroad, not from the partner, but we do have intimate violence that occurs between extramarital affairs that happen. That's a thing. It's life. Not that I'm saying they should do it, but when you're gone away for a long period of time, it's easy for the person who was left behind to think negatively of the other one, especially if they don't start calling regularly or they're not sending money as often. So yeah, I think the experiences are the same for men and women, unless of course the woman has left an abusive relationship and come abroad. We now have a huge issue with our palm cohorts looking for protection visas.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not just women, it's men too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean that's for the palm scheme.
Just kind of picking on that, I mean, when you were talking, us already thinking about, cultural norms and gender norms that are specific to PNG, but maybe some of it is shared across the Pacific as well. How do you both, when you think about women's political participation, and whether it's at the community level, provincial or national, also thinking about migration, right? How do cultural norms and gender norms sort of influence women's decisions, so the decision that women make to participate in these opportunities, whether it's leadership, political leadership, or migration opportunities for income generation for their families?
So we had Carmelo here a few months ago. Yeah, what was his title?
A historian?
Yeah,
You came as a visiting fellow.
People, something, what was it? Nobody's to somebody's, right? So prior to going onto the scheme, they were just this average person who maybe just finished out of school, broken relationship, didn't really have much going on. Then they went onto the scheme and they were making money. And then while they're away, they're now being asked to, well, can you send money for this custom work? You need to send money for your auntie and your uncle. And so they start becoming, they gain status. When they come home, they're seen as somebody now, not this nobody before they left onto the scheme. And I think that can work in a positive and negative way. I'm not too sure for women when they come back, whether they receive the same kind of recognition as a man does, because depending on, where we come from, if the man, if it's a patriarchal society, then, there's just more wealth given to that man from that. Yeah, whereas if it's from a matriarchal society, then of course the women will be seen as having, more status. But I think we are moving away from not just looking at, the cultural values, but also your modern wealth, house, car. Are you able to afford to send your kids to school? If you're sending them to school, what kind of school are you sending them to the public school or private school? What kind of clothes are they wearing? Do they have iPhones or Samsungs or tablets? Like, these are all regarded as wealth. And I think even for women, if we feel that we're able to afford things for our children, that's also seen as a sign of wealth, whether you come from a matriarchal or patriarchal society. So yeah, I think participation, values have changed, and it's just the impact of exposure to living and working overseas. Social remittance is not, it's something we don't think about a lot. We just kind of tie level mobility to economics, money, but there's a lot of cultural values as well that we come and experience here that we say, oh, I want to have this for my kids too. We bring some of these ideas back home, and if you want all your daughters to go to school, you will make sure all your daughters go to school. I'm hoping that it's not just, the income people earn, but basic things like being, violence. Violence should not and ever be your first resort to resolving conflict. It's not acceptable. We need that to be really embedded back home, as we all know.
Well, Mercy, thank you for that very, I think, a very important question. So my title changed a little bit, so I'm not looking at the constitutional making process, but I'm rethinking the participation of women in politics at all levels, but mostly at the local level. So that was what my research has changed to look at. So I guess I've been working on revising my chapter, and I probably talk about that because it's sort of really timely, especially with culture. So as some of you would know, I spent about six weeks in Bougainville, but 4 of those weeks I spent in Banguna. And I lived in Teolina's village. So if you know who Teolina is, she's a representative of the Panguna area of Euro constituency. So during that time, I was like really privileged. She invited me on a lot of their engagements when she went for community meetings, or if people were, disgruntled about this or that, they would come like in the middle of the night or whatnot, and she would say, "Oh, come with me, and you go and see how things, how I handle things." So one of the most important things I saw is that she really followed the protocol of culture. So for Melanesia and for the Pacific, I think we cannot separate culture from politics, no matter, how education or whatever other systems from outside that come to us, we take it, but then we sort of like mold it to work with our culture. So that's what I observed with her. In one of those examples, we went up to a community near the mine pit. This was in an afternoon. And what I observed from Teolina is she went and she sat in the group, but she let her stepfather go ahead. So he went ahead with the formalities. He talked with the community, just to set the scene and make sure that, we're here with Teolina. And then she let her big brother. So she's the 5th in her family. So in a matrilineal society, usually we know that women own the land, but it's from the eldest mother to the eldest daughter. So if you're 5th born, then unless your mom gives you, a share of land or portion of land, then you have that. So it's sort of unconventional for her to come to that level as well. But there's like a lot of other factors that come in to put her to that level, because, her environmental activism and how she is very vocal in issues regarding Bougainville. So those things sort of projected her out. But for her, she said, during that time, I noticed that she just sat down and she let her brother and her father-in-law talk for about, a good 20, 30 minutes. And then later they told her, so it was under that umbrella that she operated. And I noticed that for other engagements as well. When she went, she never went ahead. She made sure that, she would follow the protocols that are in place. So if you notice the Bougainville elections now, I've been following, people like Amanda Masono. She's the representative for North Bougainville, and you'll see that she's been following a lot of those protocols as well. When she goes to the village, she'll make sure that there are people in front of her that go, and then later she comes under that umbrella. So for the matrilineal society, like what they said is, the men, they are our defenders, they are our protectors, and under that system we operate. So there are, how I've been seeing is that, you know, we have a lot of outside influences. There could be like feminism and gender equality. Those are good. For a lot of times you will see that in PNG especially, it's very hard to define what gender equality is for us. You would see that when people want to talk about that, they'll probably talk about it in the lens of, you know, Western education, how we've been educated to think about this. But we need to really think about what it means in our culture. So when saying this, it is very important. Like, we recognize that we must have that equality in our parliaments and in our spaces of national decision making, even at local decision making. It's important, but we cannot forego all of what we've had for thousands of years or hundreds of years and just take on a system and say this will work for us. And also have some grace for Papua New Guinea. You know, it's just 50 years, and I don't know how long the West has taken to have women going to, you know, parliament. It must have taken a long time, right? So we're still on this path, and in terms of rethinking, I'm seeing that a lot of women are going back and thinking critically. I can't do this on my own. I need the men in my village, in my community, in my family to help me and support me. So it's Melanesian culture is very relational. So that's how I see in the case of the Elena, she's really utilized that to work for her. Yeah.
Great, thanks for exploring that and also explaining that to us. I mean, it reminds me of some of the other cultures in various parts of PNG, like where I'm from, Manus. It's a particular practice called, I mean, where I'm looking at now because we're from the same place, but it's called, in my local talk place, it's called Rokai. And Rokai means basket, and basket means women. So before any decision making that has to happen in a community, the basket has to be there. So I even experienced that recently when I went to with my father to Manus, and I had my uncles and brothers, and it's the only patrilineal, I think, compared to the other New Guinea islands. But even there, in those spaces, they gave me space to speak, and that's when I was able to talk about, you know, the research that I'm doing on masculinity and things like that. So they do have those spaces, and sometimes, you know, with the, you know, Western outside lens, we're not able to see that clearly. But I think the more we, you know, there's some cultures that we have to forego, others, you know, we can keep that can sort of support us going forward. Yeah. These are some of the practices that exist, and we should be learning more and, you know, deepening our engagement. That was where it helps elevate both men. Yeah, so really good. Thank you for those experiences and, you know, your research. Very, very important. Now I want to kind of talk about, you know, like initially when I introduced the topic, I said, you know, the issues of development and gender are complex. There are also gender-specific risks and barriers, right? For example, violence, and you spoke a little bit about that, discrimination, sometimes family obligations, like you also mentioned, can be overpowering, overbearing. These are some of the, I guess, everyday challenges that are specific to gender, both men and women. I just wanted to ask, with this particular topic or question, is how does those gender-specific barriers and risks, how do women and men face them in both labor mobility and political rights?
Well, could you do the question?
Yeah, sure. So what are some of the gender-specific risks or barriers? What do you think are some risks and barriers, I guess, challenges that women face, but also men, in political participation. And then maybe in terms of labor mobility.
Well, I guess, the Department of Pacific Affairs has done a lot of election observations and reports that have come out. There are a lot of challenges that we have in Papua New Guinea, and mostly now, it's becoming more of a money game, and it's not only women that are disadvantaged when it comes to that. There are men as well who are really struggling in terms of trying to contend with this environment, political environment that has, developed and has, become, I would say, worse over so many elections now. So yeah, there's, I guess, a lot of challenges in our systems, in how our elections could be run, the security of it, how we could try to deal with these situations, I guess. And from my stance in terms of participation, I think it's very important for us to, especially for women candidates, to start to rethink, because for Bougainville, it's really good. They have the reserve seats there. For Papua New Guinea, we've pushed for the 22 reserve seats, for the 5 regional seats. Those are never going to happen. So now it's really good opportunity for us to step back and think, how are we going to approach this to get more women into parliament again? Yeah, so it is something that I'm also thinking and considering about, and I know others are doing that too.
What do you think would be like a good step in terms of policy making around elections, how to have more women kind of included?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I probably have to think about it. Maybe.
Okay, you wanna go? And then so just around labor mobility, like basically, what do you think are some of the barriers or challenges for men and women, but also if you have suggestions for how policy making in that space can improve to help both men and women?
Well, I mean, my research looks at the governance arrangements, which are really the framework that determine when and how a country engages. And then depending on what the national policies are, is an additional determination of how many people, where they come from, decentralization. We don't actually have a set quota on the number of women, even though there's a draft policy that says it was 20% of women. Sorry, I can't remember it. It's gone off the top. But labor mobility, you have to go through an independent labor mobility unit that is sitting within the Department of Treasury. We're supposed to partner with 22 provinces and 96 districts. There's no online application. It's a lot of steps and middle people in this process. And so we've got, I mean, overall, PNG's participation compared to other countries is low. Of the 10 participating countries, we are ranked number 7. So we're third last, even though they're both biggest. And women's participation, of course, is only a tiny fraction of PNG's total participation. So since 2019 to just recently, 30th of June, we have around 5,400 that have been deployed. But there's unequal access even across the province. And so when I look at, what are the barriers, I think it is literacy to how the program works, but also how you access the benefits from that program. So whilst we see labor mobility as being decentralized, and we still have more men participating, that's also because employers want more men. But when we look at Civic Engagement Visa, which is an online bound application, There's no discrimination against gender, age, education, or work experience. We find in a kind of open competitive market, women performed exceedingly well. So I think, whether that's an indication of women just being more literate in how to access information about how to apply for the PEV, and that it is available to them to apply directly instead of going through, A, B, C, D, E. The way that we make these opportunities available, whether it's how you represent your constituencies at either local level, district, provincial, even labor mobility, how we make it accessible, whether or not we respect the culture so that we don't kind of promote one gender over the other, or we respect that in some cases there just has to be more men than women. These really determine, whether or not there are more barriers for women or for men. I know we have more women going through our education system now than we've ever had before. I think we even have more graduates that are from female cohorts. So that's already an indication that women have better access to information and like just digital literacy. I'm not actually sure whether we know the gender stats on online users. But I think, men and women, depending on how they access the information and then how they're able to proactively participate, and then depending on the external environment, whether it's a foreign policy or it's a domestic issue for us in politics, then I think, the barriers and opportunities for women will always be different.
All right, one last question, and then we can open it up to questions and comments online in the room. And this is looking at the next decade of Papua New Guinea. So what do you believe, based on your research, your own lived experience, conversations with others, what do you believe is the future for the labor mobility of political empowerment in Papua New Guinea?
Well, I can start. I'm very optimistic. We've come a long way, We've had a lot of, in terms of politics, or the arc of instability, and people were thinking that Papua New Guinea would be gone by now, and we're still here, we're resilient. So in the same sense, I'm very optimistic in terms of women's representation in parliament, because even though we've had there's lots of research, and we think that people are not really that aware about politics. I think Papua New Guineans are really active and aware about what's happening politically. And we don't have, good data and good reporting on that, but I would think that people are, they're eager to participate and make sure that, as we go into the future, we vote in the good leaders that we need. It may not be showing now, but at least people are making their choices on who their leaders are, and that's important for democracy as well. So I'm very optimistic in that sense. For women's representation and for participation, during my research, I talked to all sorts of people, from the government departments, even to the subsistence farmers, those doing cocoa farming or those panning for gold in the rivers and in the mountains or whatnot. They're aware of what's happening politically, and so I'm really optimistic that going forward, we'll work together, put our brains together, and come up with policies or ways that can work for our system, for our culture as Melanesians and as Papua New Guineans, and as Bougainville, as they're coming into towards statehood as well. People may look from the outside and think that, oh no, how are they going to sustain themselves economically? Are they prepared in terms of infrastructure and whatnot? But No, talking to everyday Bougainvilleans as well. They've been dreaming about independence before Papua New Guinea even got independent. So yeah, it's very exciting times, I think, to move forward to the future. And I hope to see more women, raise up our hands to stand for election and for to go into parliament and yeah, see that in the future for us.
Thanks, Susan. How about you, Natasha?
I think, I'm gonna add onto Bougainville, because Bougainville was the second province to send an all-female cohort to labor mobility. They were working in Tasmania, very biggest. And I've had the opportunity to speak to their regional member, yeah. And for Bougainville, their participation in labor mobility is for preparation for sovereignty. It's to skill their workforce, both women and men. And they work together, unlike other provinces. I'm just using Bougainville as an example, because they are quite unique. They do have coordination among the open members for the districts, with the provincial member and the regional member and the president, which I don't see in other provinces. So I think, for Bougainville, I can see that they are preparing for independence. And so they are creating all these pipelines for, technical training. They're trying to set up their own TVET training institutions in partnership with the Pacific Australia Skills, PAS, used to be APTC. And so it's interesting to see how Bougainville is looking at moving forward with labor mobility. I know for the Pacific Engagement Visa, when I ran the survey, there were a few people from Bougainville actually that had won. But I think, like with all migration, the fear is brain drain. That is our fear. And for me, I think that if we don't have mechanisms in place to ensure brain, or to limit, I guess, brain drain, then obviously the host country is going to capitalize, I guess, on all these people who are leaving. And so in Papua New Guinea, we don't actually have as many skilled people going onto the scheme as opposed to, say, people in Fiji or in Tonga or Samoa, where there is this huge labor force leaving, high skilled people leaving for labor mobility. But for PNG, we got what, 12.7 million people, only about 300,000 actually formal taxpayers. We can afford to let people go. Every year, a minimum of 8,000 graduates per year, only from tertiary education institutions alone. We haven't even counted the TVETs. We have a lot of skills waste in the country. So my kind of future for PNG is we should give them as much opportunity as they can access, whether that's, back at home or abroad. If there's an opportunity for them to better themselves abroad, they should go and we should support them. At the same time, we should encourage them to give back to PNG. You can't just go and forget about your homeland. We haven't. We are lived experience of it. We are examples of it. We are not brain drained for PNG. I don't see us as being brain drained by being our home. And so this is the hope I have, that we will have Papua New Guineans who will go and live and work abroad. They will take their families with them, but they will never ever forget. And they will never ever forget their culture. They know who they are. They know where they come from. It shouldn't matter what boundary they live in. And if they want to maintain connections to their culture, then they should also be able to do that. Who said that when we leave home and come to another country, that we're another brain drain statistic? We didn't say that. We never came up with that. It's not our concept. So yeah, I think we need to start rethinking how we define brain drain, and that PNG also needs to step up in how we better manage migration flows, because we are going to see a new wave of Papua New Guineans coming into Australia on the Pacific Engagement Visa, and they are permanent migrants and they are bringing their families. So we also have to think about the future generation outside of PNG.
Hey, thank you both. Thank you so much for just explaining your research, but also providing us with even your own lived experiences and how you view the different areas of research that you're working in, and also given PNG's 50th anniversary, it's very timely to reflect on this. So thank you so much. I'd now like to open it up to everyone here in the room or online. If you have any reflections to make or questions, please do raise your hands and I can see Rochelle. Thank you, Rochelle. You can go ahead.
Thank you, that was very interesting. Just a couple of points, as I've always told you, Tash, like mobility is a political football and it gets used as such. But my experience is mainly in Vanuatu, which may also help PNG centres sort of come up with numbers and watching up over the years. So as you know, the social upward mobility that Sharon and I wrote about nearly a decade ago, I'm getting old now, it's really helped the seasonal workers change their status within their community. And then at least Howard and I did some work around REC female workers who went back to their country, back to Vanuatu, and found themselves in different types of leadership roles that they had considered before as well, which wasn't something driven by the New Zealand government, but by themselves as a group. And that was also leading, sorry, just a couple more points. That was also just leading up to, when you're saying about the brain drain and mainly being men, it's also been an opportunity for women to stand up in Vanuatu and take those leadership roles, the DG roles, and be able to step up into different roles of the men that are skilled go away. But what's the thing that we've been looking at recently is we noticed that a large number of seasonal workers from both Australia and New Zealand are now vying for becoming political candidates, right? But they're using these schemes as a way to fund their political aspirations. So it'll be really interesting to see if women start doing it, because we know that's one of the barriers, right, for participation, is using it. And we know of whole communities that are starting to group together in families and groups and collect money from New Zealand and Australia so they can have these campaigns. Just I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, how you use the income that you earned, yeah, it's really going to position who you are in back home, whether you are just a community leader or you're actually preparing for election. And it takes a lot of money to campaign, especially if you're running as an independent. But I think for PNG, we have a very volatile environment because we are decentralized and they are power brokers, and they are also the biggest risk to the incumbents. Because if they were to stand, they already have the people's support because they have also selectively awarded jobs, which they're not supposed to, but it's based on, this is the offer, it comes down, and then as it comes down, we either see people from a particular constituency going or someone who's not even from that area. And so I don't know, like for PNG, how many of these power brokers will actually become political candidates, or whether those who have come back on the scheme. I mean, because Papua New Guinea, I don't think we've actually saved enough money to run our own campaign, but that's not to say they can't. They can always align with another political party. I think that the driver for people is, building a house, putting your kids to school. I would really actually love to see people use their own land to build some kind of either a house or a rental property, because we know that land and property accrue value. They're the only assets that do not depreciate. We have that, but we don't use it. And there's lots of barriers for why it's really hard for the banks to recognize your land as bankable. But yeah, I think, like I didn't mention it, but New Zealand's recognized seasonal employer scheme actually has higher participation of women than the farm scheme. And that's also because they're short ceremony.
No, New Zealand RSC schemes at 9%.
Higher than PAR.
Or PNG.
Yes, for
Yes.
PNG.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess because it's shorter period too, but I don't know. Like I'm not really, my research doesn't really look at the gendered lens of labor mobility, because we first of all have an issue with access. And then we can look at gender. But otherwise it's still predominantly male, high male participation. But maybe with aged care, we see more women going. But yeah, like I don't know. I have yet to see. I think perhaps longer term we can do more impact evaluation, because we're only just sending numbers now. We don't have enough to really look at those other dynamics.
That's just what I was meaning, that over time you might, because it didn't happen overnight for Vanuatu, like as I said, over time, so building up,
Yeah,
women getting more.
I think PNG has a lot of lessons to learn from Vanuatu, especially those countries that have been sending for longer and also higher numbers. There's lots of lessons learned that we can take from Vanuatu and so on.
Yep, Colin.
Firstly, thanks very much for the discussion. It's great to have, three Papua New Guinea women, very smart, intellectual, discuss these topics. So thank you for that. My question is about, what does gender equality look like in the PNG context, especially in regard to political representation? And I'm asking this in the context that for the 50 years, there was a delegation on decentralisation that came to PNG like a couple of weeks ago, and it seems that there could be a reform where the parliament will be split into like a senate and like a lower house, upper house and lower house. And there's a proposal that the upper house, which will have the premiers, which country governs the premiers, and there'll be a male and female representative. So in that upper house, you have 22 male premiers and 22 female premiers. Do you think that sort of Big Bang kind of reform would go well in the PNG context from political representation? And is that a context that could be announced in the next 15 years?
Sorry, it's a question to that question. Is it like a proposal that they've sort of put forward and they're going throughout the country to?
Yeah, it's a proposal that
Yeah.
that delegation, which is very senior, weeks ago.
Mhm.
And so I want to get maybe GJ, but also Tash, you understand decentralisation. Is that, you think that would be a proposal that would, move the needle forward?
Having both the representation of men and ladies.
I mean, that's interesting, and yeah, thanks, Colin. I guess yeah, I'd be interested to to look into that proposal. I haven't heard of it, so but yeah, I mean, like essentially we're working towards getting more women into parliament and into spaces of decision making, which is very important. Yeah, maybe I'll have to have a think more about that, but I think it's a interesting proposal. Of course, there's a lot of, I guess, technicalities that we'll have to consider, because like after the 22 reserve seats didn't get through, And I guess it was like right before the last election, they were talking about the 5 regional seats. But there was still so much debate about like how it would it look like? Would they be like governors as well? Or, stuff like that. So there's a lot of, I guess, debate and thought that would have to go into that. And I'm not sure if they're gonna have public consultations on that, or maybe like have consultations with, people in institutions like this, or think tanks or universities, or with local people or whatnot, to see what they think about that. But yeah, essentially, I would agree that we definitely do need more women in parliament. To your question on what gender equality looks like for us in Papua New Guinea, I think it's a question where obviously different people would have different responses and views to it. Like I think of myself as like more conservative in my values and in my thoughts. And I think it impacts a lot on my outlook as well as in my research as well. I'm from a patrilineal society. I think it was a really big blessing for me to go into Bougainville and to research the matrilineal society. Put into perspective a lot of where I'm from a patriarchal society, right? I wouldn't say at all that at one time my dad or my uncles or my brothers made me feel less than them. But for my understanding is that even though I come to this level as a PhD candidate, when I go back home, like I explained, there are systems in place that I have to recognize. I just can't go and say, hey, I'm a PhD holder now, you need to listen to me. Like, in politics as well, that does not work well for women. They can be very educated, but there are systems in place that you have to, I think, work with. And that's how I guess we can look at and try to explain what gender equality is for Melanesian, for Papua New Guinea, and for the Pacific.
That's what gender equality means, but also this proposal of having men and women really.
I mean, I've heard that idea being floated. And I think before I get to that one, gender equality for me is, first of all, knowing who you are in your family, in your clan, and of course, what your relationship is within this culture. I don't really, and I see it from my mother, she is a PhD, well, she's a doctor, but she's the 8th born in a family of 11. And even though she has, achieved this level of education, she's gone to school in Australia, she's also been a senior public servant as a forester. My mom knows her place when it comes to culture. And we don't devalue her because she is at the back in the kitchen cooking, not to be seen. That is the culture from my mother's culture. And it doesn't mean that we are, of any lesser value. It's just that these are the protocols. When you're in this setting, like here, I'm fighting for like in front. But when I'm at home, even though my brothers are younger than me, my brothers will go first, and that's fine. It's okay. It might be seen as, oh, the women are not empowered. No, we are empowered. We just know our place. And we let the men go first, and then they allow us to speak. We are given that space, and then we speak. So I think it's not that we have a gender issue, it's how we define what gender equality is from our perspective. So yeah, like for me, I think, I know who I am, I know where I come from. I may be the eldest in my family. I've got 3 brothers behind me who don't earn as much as me. But when it comes to culture, they own the land, and that is okay. because I'm going to benefit too. And so will my children. And that's just the way we operate. For this, upper house, lower house, I always think of money. It's already very expensive to maintain one household. We need to do some kind of performance assessment. But if we're gonna introduce an extra layer and have double, then we need careful consideration and consultation into whether it's really gonna work in our favor or it's going to exacerbate the existing social, political, physical, spiritual, cultural values that we already have in place. So I just worry that when we introduce something so radical, because it's not even part of the solution, whether or not, how much is it going to cost, and is it worth the cost? Otherwise, yeah, we need to rethink whether it's 22-22 or we phase it, depending on who are the higher performing, better performing provinces to qualify to have a premiership kind of level. So yeah, I just feel like, it has to be a very carefully considered proposal based on wide national consultation, not just high level policymakers, because we know they're going to benefit. It's the people on the ground that have to understand how the system. We already have problems with just 22 provinces and districts. So yeah, I don't think there's nothing wrong with having more women in parliament. I just think we also need to step back and just ask ourselves too what we want, and whether seeing 22 women alongside 22 men that's the future. I don't know.
All right, thank you. We have arrived at 11:30, which is the end. Yes. Oh, is there a question online?
There's one online.
Okay, yes, we did start a few minutes later. Go ahead.
From viewer, thanks for the seminar and great panel. Are there any lessons from internal migration, PNG, particularly from rural urban drift over the last 50 years that can inform approaches to PNG?
Well, I mean, Naya is in the room.
Expert on that.
She did the.
It's a great question.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, we all know there's been a huge migration shift to urban areas from rural areas. And it's largely because of the idea that there's more opportunities in urban areas, which is half true. You just have more jobs, better access to schools even. And I guess, looking at the Pacific Engagement Visa, there's definitely going to be, I think even if people shift outside of the country, we will still have many more people to fill those gaps. It's not a brain drain for us. Internally, Papua New Guineans will fill any vacancies left behind, and that is good because we already have less jobs in the market to this growing out of control population. We have an out of control population. I think the longer we keep people in the country, the more it's going to exacerbate all these social issues that we're having right now. And we have to get people out. Like I see Papua New Guinea as a ticking time bomb because we have a very high unproductive workforce. And when they become very unproductive, they get up to all sorts of things and they do all sorts of experiments. And we need to make them productive. If we can't make them productive in the country because we just haven't got our stuff right and all together, but we have, migration pathways outside, let's send them out. It's not like we're not graduating more people to fill in those spots. We don't actually have any arrangement or any policy yet, but there is already talk in PNG through the currency dialogue. And so I think it will be interesting times for PNG moving forward. Now that we have this dialogue and there's a lot of talk back home now about how do we transform the narrative of brain drain. So yeah, I think it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, yes, go ahead.
Because it's a really important question, and I think that Natasha is absolutely right in that there's no jobs in Papua New Guinea. There are many youth, the biggest population with young people. So I think there's going to be many people that will welcome the opportunity to send family members abroad, provided the opportunities are fair, treat them with fairness in the Australian context. And as Natasha also said, Papua New Guineans will never forget home. You're guaranteed that you will have a cycle of remittances from home. So that's one aspect of that question. But coming back on the lessons from rural to urban migration in the last years, I think this is a really important space that's going to define Papua New Guinea for the next 50 years, important increasing urbanization, urban spaces, and what is underappreciated is the kind of creative practice that Papua New Guineans do in urban spaces. So oftentimes we talk about formal labor force and wage working as somehow the only opportunity that's there in schools. But what's happening in the informal settlements where 50% and growing of Papua New Guinea's urban population live, practices that occur in those places around informal schooling, school education, around water, around health services, around community practices, so much to learn about that is currently untapped. And I will be advocating for looking at this space. This can be great question.
All right. Thank you both. Let's give Natasha and GJ a hand. Thank you very much. I think for sure is that we continue to reflect and hopefully the next few events that are coming up for PNG's anniversary and celebrations, we'll do a lot more of that. And thank you again, everyone, for making time to be here. Great questions that you've asked and responded to. Thank you, everyone, also online. Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you.